Hey guys, this is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com, and today I'm reviewing a session I played last night. This is a two tables of 5-10 deep PLO, and one table of 5-10 no limit, and one table of 3-6 deep no limit. I'm doing this really to kind of force you guys to, or at least some of you, to at least look at some PLO being played. I think just based on people I've talked to, and also based on the number of views on some of my videos, I can tell that people are not really interested in learning PLO, and I just think that that's a big mistake for anybody that's planning on playing for at least a year and a half more, maybe 2 years or more. I just think that learning other games is really important to your long-term earnings potential, and PLO is a game with a lot less figured out and a lot more variance, which I know turns some people off to it, but it makes it so that there are a lot of very weak players that play and don't find out that they're weak for a long time. So I figured that a lot of you would um, are going to be forced to watch this because you want to see the no limit action, and hopefully you'll pay a little bit of attention to the PLO, and you can thank me later. So I don't really have reads on these people, but I guess we'll develop them as this session goes on. I do know, I've played a little bit with Stuart Patterson, and Scott Fishman I haven't played much with, but know of, and Vivek I know personally, but I've never really played with him. So, um, not really any assumptions, too many assumptions going in about the three of them. And here on the bottom left, I just check behind with Ace King, and I wouldn't say it's 100% my standard, but I'll do it sometimes, and I think it's important to have, um, or to not have in your C betting range some of the time, at least some of your ace highs, as well as some mid pairs and things like that. And I was planning on calling some turns, but Deuce of Spades not one of them. It's just, even if I am ahead, he has too much equity with a lot of his hands. Anyways, yeah, I assume Vivek is going to be pretty reasonable and tight, and I guess I'd assume the same thing for Scott, maybe a little more aggressive. Here, a pretty standard C bet with all my backdoor draws and a really disconnected flop like this. Stewart, I don't really remember much from what I've played with him before. I remember some notes from this session that I take later, but at the time of this, I didn't really have any reads. This is a pretty weak hand. 2-4-5-8 with a suit, but in a limp pot on the button, I feel that I can limp with it. And for those of you switching to PLO from no limit, um, bottom two pair on this flop is basically you don't have a hand. It's a terrible hand, and you just check fold it. In most circumstances, obviously, there's a big difference between a five-way limp pot and a heads-up raised pot, where you can do some things with bottom two pair and hope to get to showdown. But in a pot like this, there's just no way to play it. You're either way behind or very, very slightly ahead with no kind of implied odds. So here, ace 10 of clubs, I decided to check behind the flop. Betting is fine, but I hate getting check raised with a hand like this, and it's a good hand to have in my check behind range and be able to call a turn and evaluate on the river. To be honest, I played this. I don't think that I played all that great, if I remember correctly. I was super tired last night and realized that I, on this computer, didn't really have a lot of sessions to go over recorded. So, recorded this before going to bed because I knew that it'd take me a while to get around to it today. But yeah, I think that my no limit game suffered partially just because I was tired, but partially because I haven't played in a while. I've mostly been playing PLO and trying to learn some of the horse games. Um, but I still think I'll be able to analyze the things I did, and hopefully didn't play that bad. So here I'm taking the note that he checked the river with top two, and I'm not sure if he was planning on check raising, because he has to be almost positive his hand is good. So I guess he was probably check raising, or he. And I took the note that he's either tricky or just nitty about value betting. And here, this is a, I wouldn't say premium hand, but a very good hand to raise in position. But on a flop like this, it's just way too likely that it hit one of the limpers in the face. Like a lot of people limp high pocket pairs, so queens, kings, tens. Um, and it's not that hard to flop like king jack or even like ace jack 10, things like that. They're not going to fold the flop, and I have no equity whatsoever, so I'm fine with just giving up in that spot. I'll try to discuss pre-flop a little bit more than usual in PLO, just for the people that are strictly no limit players. Um, but forgive me if I sometimes take some things for granted that you haven't learned yet. Kings and threes double suited is definitely a premium hand. Um, it actually, if they were single suited, I'd probably just call in this spot, just because we don't have a history, and I assume Vivek's going to be pretty tight. And I don't think he's going to be four betting without aces that often. Um, so we don't expect to get it in pre-flop good that often. But with double suited hand, double suited kings, you're never that far behind, and it just crushes a lot of other hands. So here I decided to check behind with bottom two pair on a three flush board. Uh, I guess I've been checking behind a lot on no limit flops, but I think this is a good example of balancing the times my other hands that I've been checking behind, and I avoid getting check raised on this flop, which I can't really stand to check raise. Or I could, I don't know, it's a pretty gross spot and completely read dependent. And then I can play it on future streets. It's a pretty deceptive hand. Ace Jack 10 Deuce Rainbow is not a very good hand, but with the antes and I don't know. I expect people to not be that good. Um, I feel I have enough fold equity and post flop equity to go for the steal there. And I flop bottom pair, backdoor, straight draws. And this is a turn that against a lot of people would be good to bet. I think it actually kind of is a good turn to bet in that most of his hands are something like. Sometimes he just has like flush draws, like tens with diamonds. Um, Although I have 10 of diamonds, but something like that. And then he also has a lot of queen XXX, which can't stand a bet on the turn unless it has diamonds or hearts. The reason I decided not to bet is that it's just there's so many hand combos now that can have a flush draw, like enough reason to continue. And it's definitely not impossible for him to have a straight. And he bets 10. Um, I don't know if that was a misclick or what, but I just call because it doesn't matter, and I wanted to see what he had. All right, so here is a kind of tricky spot. This player limped, and I raised to isolate and got two callers, and he pots the flop into us. To me, I'm assuming he's a weak player based on his under the gun limp, um, and I could definitely be wrong with that, but I'm gonna go with that read, especially just the under the gun limp call plus potting the flop into two people without initiative. Just I think it's pretty likely that he's a weak player. Players like him in general, obviously I have to make a lot of generalizations because I don't know him. Um, do not lead super strong. They're usually more apt to slow play or check raise even. I think that he'll have a lot of uh, flush draws and gutters, mostly gutters, I think, on a board like this, since there are so many gut shots. And I just don't think he would lead with like king seven suited or whatever he's limping under the gun there, I think it's possible, but I think it's more likely he'd check call. And if he did have a hand like king nine or a set, he would check call or check raise. So I'm gonna call one. It does suck because turn cards get pretty tricky for me, but I still think the best play is just to call. And it does suck a little that I have a player behind me to worry about. It's pretty easy for him, not easy, but very possible he could have a king. Ace is a good card for me in that I don't think he's going to be betting a lot of his like king X type hands if he did bet the flop. So if he did bet the turn again, I would definitely be calling the turn. Given my read on him as a weak player, and just that the only things that make sense at that point are Ace X of diamonds and sets that I just don't think, or two pair that I don't think he'd play that way. I just don't expect him to bet king again, and I expect him to have air or draws a ton of the time. Since he didn't bet, I think it's somewhat likely now that he has a king, and I'm obviously not going to try to two barrel him off of a king, given that it's a drawy board and I don't know enough about him. He is a fish potentially, so I don't want to risk trying to bluff him off his hand. And there's the potential that he does have like a combo draw of some kind and check shoves a turn. Pretty unlikely, but it's possible. So we river a nine, and it's very, very likely we have the best hand now, whether against a king or against a bluff. Now I think it's pretty likely he has a bluff, but I don't really think there's any reason to raise the river, because it is possible he somehow backdoored into like flush. He could have like a 9-5 suited type hand, and there's nothing he can really call with. Um, I mean, there's a small possibility he has like ace X of diamonds and is a weak enough player that he's calling a raise, but I don't know. I was just worried on the off chance that he had me beat. It wasn't worth the times that he either, like this, had a bluff, or some kind of like weird spaz with like a king that he's folding to a raise. And so here on the bottom left, I check behind once again. Maybe I'm checking behind a bit too much, but I think it's good to show you guys that checking behind's an option. I think some people too often just auto bet uh, every flop, auto c bet every flop. This is a board that there are just a ton of hands that he can play back with, a ton of gutters and pair plus gutters, and he can even play back with overs on a board like this if he has like queen jack suited. I wouldn't be surprised to see him check raise. So I decided to take a free card, and I do have some backdoor straight draws and obviously my two overcards. And here I'm taking the note on the way he played that hand. And I'm definitely going to assume that he's a fish based on his limp call with 7-3 suited, and then, combined with the way that he played it post flop. I chose to play without a HUD just because I wasn't gonna like play a very long session, and I didn't think the stats would be all that useful in a short session like this. And um, I'm capable of paying attention to just a few tables. 9886 with a suit is not like a premium hand, but good enough to raise, uh, in my opinion, from the hijack. And I flop top boat. I think it's really likely that Vivek has like a queens with a suit type hand, kings with a suit, jacks with a suit. So I think that this bet gets called a decent amount of the time. I was thinking about going for a small bet, but I thought it was unlikely given that we know each other, and I know he respects my game, and I would expect he'd be a little bit afraid to get into leveling wars with me in spots like this. I didn't expect him to check raise bluff that much. This is a spot where I'd usually bet something like 36, and hope that people float or check raise bluff me, things like that. And it does well with all my air that I want to bet that small. But since I didn't think that he was going to be playing back at me that much, I just went for a slightly bigger bet just to get a little more value from his one or two calls with a hand like queens, just because he's never folding a hand like that on the flop. He did fold, so I assume he didn't have a pair. But yeah, like I said, I was not expecting him to play back at me too much in a spot like that. Here on the bottom right, Mr. Cup limped, and I folded Queen 6 offsuit. If I find out later that he's a huge fish, I can be isolating with hands as weak as basically any two cards in a spot where I don't think that the big blind's going to go too crazy on me. Just because he's going to play so poorly post flop and is limping such a wide range that pretty much anything can play okay. Let's look back at this PLO hand. So, looks like... Okay, Fishman limps, Bro raises, Willie calls. And Stewart re-raises, and everybody calls. It's kind of a gross spot for Stewart, given that Scott Fishman's right behind him with a deep stack and other players have short stacks. If I'm Stewart, I'm praying that Willy Wonka reships so that I can shove with presumably a strong hand. He would have to have a strong hand to be um, raising in a spot like that. So Scott leads um, 280 and a 491. A couple things I want to say about this. First of all, I don't like his bet size. I think he has two options here for bet sizing, assuming his players are good. One of them is pot, because he's not betting 280 and folding to anybody. So he might as well pot it. Like he's not getting anything out of betting smaller as far as like deception or the ability to bet fold and spot. I know he's not bet folding because you just shouldn't ever be betting a hand here and folding, betting that big at least. The other option is betting half of Willy Wonka's stack, so something like 170, 172. And you can do that with some hands that could potentially fold if Bodacious Bro shoves, but would call if Willy Wonka shoves. And if Bodacious Bro calls and Willy Wonka shoves, it gives you the option to reopen the action and shove over that. So it puts Bro in a tough spot. Actually, timeout. I should correct myself. I forgot that Stewart was in the hand. So he could potentially be betting 280 to get it in with Bodacious Bro and Willy Wonka, but be folding to Stewart. So I don't really hate his bet size anymore. I think that's fine. And I actually prefer it. I don't think he should be potting many hands in this spot with stacks that deep. So I actually like his bet size depending on his hand, and I think that 172 is his other option. So sorry for being wrong about that. So both players call, and now I guess we don't know anybody's hand, but I assume money's getting in, at least from Scott and Willy Wonka. Bodacious Bro could maybe find a fold depending on his hand, but I'm surprised he didn't just shove the flop. Okay, so Scott had top two and double gutter, pretty standard. Bodacious Bro had the second nut straight, pretty standard. Willy Wonka had open ender and an overpair and a backdoor flush draw, so that was standard on everybody's part. I guess Bodacious Bro was going to be folding some turns, maybe the jack or queen, maybe even a six. I'm not sure. So yeah, I'm fine with everybody's play there. And here on the bottom right, I was thinking about raising just because, getting pots with a fish, but I thought it was going a little too overboard, would be a little too obvious, and instead decided to 3-bet in position over here, which is, you're never going to go that wrong 3-betting in position um, with a hand that you weren't going to otherwise play. And he four bets. Um, it's not a bad spot to shove as far as his range, which I think is pretty wide. The problem is that Queen 8 offsuit plays really poorly um, against his calling hands. Um, I do feel that he's folding a decent amount of the time, but and if I had a hand like 6-8 suited, I'd be likely to shove. But Queen 8 offsuit just gets crushed too often when he does have his kings or Ace Queen suited or etc. etc. And a little bit of a loose open. I don't think I usually open Queen 8 offsuit from cutoff, but decided to. Here I see bet this flop into two people with it's a very uncoordinated board, and I do have a pair backdoor flush draw and backdoor straight draw. I expect to get folds often enough to make it profitable with my equity. And Fishman leads 55 on the turn, which to me means he's either has the nuts, which is possible, but I think most likely he has a hand that doesn't want to put a lot of money in. So something like a pair and a flush draw, or what else? Maybe like a ace, like a two pair type hand, two pair and a gutter somehow, something like that. That doesn't want to stand a big bet. But I think most likely like pair and a flush draw. Specifically not flush draw because the ace is out there, so it's really likely check called with an ace and then um, decided to, yeah, and I think it's almost definite that he has the nut flush in this spot. I call because I do have two pairs. Um, First of all, I have the outs to improve to a boat, and um, it's not definite that I have the worst hand, but with the pot odds that I was being offered, I have the chance to improve, and I just think that I'm good often enough, plus the times that I improve to call 55 into whatever it was, 420 or something like that. This is a weird spot on the top right. So it looks like C bet and then a small raise and a cold call by Stewart. I would expect Stewart to always have either um, aces, kings, or queen jack. I'd say his most likely hand is queen jack or kings, given that it looks like, and I think he's the type to three bet a lot of his aces. But anyways, and I think Haralabab has either blockers, so queen queen, 7-6 or something like that, or he has straight and very rarely has aces. I don't think he's raising with any other set. And Kate is thinking. If I were in Kate's spot with Queen Jack, I would just call and get it in on any turn. It's too likely that you're up against Queen Jack in a set, or some kind of like Queen Jack plus two pair. Now that Haralabab checks, I assume he was bluffing. And it looks like Stewart did have Queen Jack because there's no reason for him to. He can't not have Queen Jack. He's not going to bet a set here, and he's not going to float. He's not going to cold call a bet and a raise with a hand that has to bluff now. So I would bet, I'd bet all of my money that Stewart has Queen Jack. And I assume he won't get called unless somebody else does too. In which case he'll get raised. Here on the top left, I decided to lead. This is a board that uh, doesn't connect too well with other people. Why did I call pre-flop? This looks like a bad call pre-flop. Yeah. I mean, it's not terrible because there are the antes, and I'm the big blind, so it's only 20 in a pot of 80. I don't hate it. Um, but anyways, I lead because I think this board doesn't hit people too often. I think Vivek has a lot of high cards and potentially could fold. Will probably fold just like jacks or something. Wow. All right, so I would have lost all my money because I bet it all that Stewart had queen jack. So he decided to turn his tens into a bluff. I guess trying to get Kate off specifically aces or kings. Um, I mean, it would have worked against me because I couldn't see how he could not have queen jack. But his flop call was really poor. There are not really any good turns for him besides a 10. Obviously, if the board pairs on the turn, like ace or a king, he does have a boat and beats queen jack, but it's too likely that somebody else has ace or kings or ace king. Like it's tough for him to get money in a head at that point. He just needs to fold the flop. And Kate's play is pretty standard all around. I would have probably. Hmm. Yeah, I guess I would have checked the turn because I thought it was pretty likely that Haralbab had queen jack, and there's no real reason to bet. You're not going to bluff somebody off of a better hand because the only better hand is the nuts. You get a little bit of value. You would have gotten value out of Stewart's specific hand since he had the set and the flush draw. You might get value out of a set of kings if you make a smallish bet. But um, yeah, I wouldn't have hated a bet by Kate, but uh, Kate played the hand fine. Anyways, on the and I don't mind Stewart's river bet just because it would have worked against me. Um, but I don't like his flop call. I didn't think he was calling the flop with that hand, which is why I didn't think he'd need to bluff the river. And even that hand, he's only trying to bluff Kate off two specific hands, ace, ace, and king, king. I guess if somehow somebody had deuce four, he was trying to bluff him off that. Anyways, here I lead just because I have some backdoor draws. I have two overcards. I obviously can't check call, so I decide that uh, this will work often enough to lead, and the second barrel works pretty often too. Here on the bottom left, I have aces. I raise the small blind, get called. I have no reads on this player, and I get raised on the flop. I don't think he's raising a ton of flush draws here, just because of how likely it is that I fight back on a flop like this. So I think he has a lot of gutters, maybe like ace 10, king 10, and then a lot of sevens. Um, but if he knows I'm a station, he could have hands as weak as like jack 10. And on the turn, I'm deciding whether to shove or call, and I think I'm going to call because I think a lot of his gutters are going to barrel off on some of the bricks and a lot of flush cards, which I don't think he has. So I was planning on calling pretty much any river, and it's not the best river in the world because I think he gives up on some of his bluffs, but he also continues, in my opinion, to value bet with a hand like ace 10 or king 10. He did have a 7, and I consider that just cooler. Alright, so a couple hands going on. On the top left, to call a raise on the button with ace, queen, queen 9 with a queen high suit. It's a good hand, but not a great hand. Given ace high suit would make it a lot better. And I decided to float this board. I do have the ace of diamonds, so I think he will. There are not many flushes that he would bet twice with. Besides the nut flush, maybe the king high flush, but his other flushes and his straights, I think we'll check the turn, and then I'll be able to bet the turn and river. I think it's important to, at least a lot of the time, try to win the pot when you have the nut blocker, just because of how often you will actually have the nuts, or almost as often, or sometimes more often, depending on the spot. You'll have the nuts, and you have to be bluffing some percentage of the time. So I used the blocker as my excuse to bluff, and I decided that raising the flop, uh, I'd rather just float. And if he does have a set, he's not folding the flop, probably. I just thought that I had a better shot on future streets, and it was kind of less expensive. And if he does have like a king high flush, I don't think I'm taking him off of it. So uh, I can give up if he bets the turn. And he does bet the turn here. Um, and I think the best play is just to give up. Mr. Cup potted the flop into two people in a limp pot, and I check called with my 8. And I think it's a tough decision on the turn, but I just don't think that he is. And so I do decide to give up on the top left. I don't think that he's value betting thin very often, and there are a lot of gutters on this board. So I decided to call the turn and decide on the river, and he checks back with top pair on the river. Um, and he played that hand, fine, pretty well. And I guess I'm not shocked that he potted with top pair twice, but I thought that he might not bet those hands as strongly. And I mean that's somewhat supported by the fact that he didn't didn't bet the river. That he's just not, you know, three street valuing that thin. Um, so if he's not betting as thin on the turn, then that makes more of his range bluffy because it takes away a lot of his value hands. Anyways, I decided to limp behind with 9-7 suited rather than raise. The reason I did this is that I knew that my raise would be looked at as an isolation raise, which is fine. But I was worried that I was going to get three bet from the blinds, and if I had a hand like Queen Eight offsuit, which I've been playing a lot apparently this session, I wouldn't mind getting three bet and just folding my hand. But I'd hate to get three bet with a hand as strong as this, and maybe have to fold. Whereas if I limp, actually I probably could have called against deeper stacks. But anyways, if I limp and get raised, it's a pretty easy call, and Mr. Cup will call behind, and we keep him in the pot. And I don't mind it going four-way limped or three-way as is. This is a board that I don't think anybody's going to mess around on. Mr. Cup's definitely not, and I don't know the other players, so I'm happy to just take a stab here. I do have all my backdoor draws. And on the top left, I don't remember pre-flop. Okay. Raise, call, call. And I flop middle set, which is, I don't know, in a 4 or 5-way pot. I forget which this is. Okay, 4-way pot. It's, I mean, not the nuts, 200 big blinds deep, but against aggressive players, you're going to have to go broke with this hand, and maybe not on the flop. You can sometimes play it a little bit more slowly and wait for a safe turn card. Um, but I'm betting and getting it in with most people. And when Stewart pots it, that's actually kind of scary to me because he basically either has. I don't think he just has deuces. He would have deuces with some kind of gutter or flush draw. And Jack seven's possible, but I think if he has Jack seven, he has some cards with it. And then they're just all the draws, which I'm ahead of, but I'm not crushing many draws. So I think this is actually a close spot against a lot of people. Um, but I've seen Stewart be pretty aggressive, and so I decided to go with my hand. I have trouble folding the second nuts, and he does just have a draw. His play's not bad, but I was a little surprised by his aggression there. Like he's fine against anything but a set. Even top two pair, he has 50% equity or so. And then he is ahead of some hands. I guess he's not ahead of many hands that are actually getting it in with them. But he's never in terrible shape, and even against a set, he's 30%. I don't mind his play, and he would get me to fold a lot of hands there. But I am a little bit surprised by it, so I took a note on that, just because it's a little unusual, but definitely not a bad play, I would say. Nut draws are so powerful in PLO, just because you can never be dead, and you dominate so many other draws. That's not a spot where he's dominating my other draws just because he has bottom pair to go with it, but it's just a good spot for him to be in. Ace Jack offsuit, I decided to 3-bet, and if I get 4-bet, I'm probably going to get it in. It's a tough spot. Here on the top right, this is a little bit of a loose defend by me in the small blind. I am double suited, and just I have good odds. And with one nut suit and some cards that play okay together, I don't think it's that bad. So I get called in flop top pair. I'm obviously getting it in. Um, Here I flop top pair, gutter, and two backdoor draws. I'm going to lead. It's a very strong hand, but it gets ugly on a lot of turns. So I'd rather be the one betting the turn than checking the turn. And here on the top left, I'm obviously calling a 3-bet. This is a very, not a very strong hand, but a strong hand. And it is a little bit ugly that stacks are the way they are, but I just think it's a strong enough hand to call a 3-bet with and plays well on a lot of flops. Ace Jack, the question is whether to bet or to check raise, or if you want to be tricky and check call. Um, I think either is fine, but I think the problem with checking is that he's going to check back a lot of his nines and his pocket eights type hands that are going to be calling this flop bet, potentially raising. And though he will bluff with some air, I think he connects with this board a lot, and at least often enough for me to just bet and get value. Even the hand like just you know um, Queen 8 suited of hearts, he's probably going to be shoving. All right, so two interesting hands, or three now, but I'm just going with Ace Jack. Here on the top right, I still have my top pair gutter and two backdoor draws. I think it's very, very unlikely that he has a big hand here, given that I don't think he's raising a set of fours without something to go with it. I have a nine, and there's a nine on board, so there's only one combo of a set of nines, and I don't think he's raising a set of deuces unless he has something to go with it. Um, I think wraps are very likely, and then I also think just air type hands or just kings or something like that that he didn't want to call with are very likely. So I'm going to start with a call, and might get tricky on future streets. And then on the top left, I'm just priced in at this point, in my opinion, to see a flop three-way with this hand. And there are some flops I'm going to have to end up folding, but it just hits so many boards, and this is one of them. Gutter and 10 high flush draw is not, the best flop I was hoping for, but it's not bad. They both played incredibly standard, and I hit for the side pot, but not the main. So I just about break even, I think. On the bottom left, I get him with the flush draw, and I end up winning. And on the top right, I river two pair, but his wraps hit, and I think his wraps are actually fairly likely given that he check back the turn. I think some people raise with a wrap on a rainbow board like that just because they can four bet or call if you decide to three bet the flop. But then on the turn he can't bet call it, so he decides to check behind. So I think it is pretty likely that he has a wrap in this spot, or not, super likely, but once he bets, and especially a smaller bet, which I think to me looks value-y on a board like this where he knows I can't really have air. Um, or maybe he was trying to induce something. I just decided to fold pretty quickly. Two pair jacks and tens with a suit is a very good hand. I'd be three betting it from most positions, except against people that are super four bet happy. Stewart cold calls, which to me means either like he could have a high pair with a suit, or he could have like 7, 8, 9, 10 type hands, something like that. I decided to check the flop because I do have um, a decent amount of backdoor equity in that, any queen, any heart, and then my two jacks and 1 10 or 2 10s if you want to count the diamond. Um, and I just don't think that he's going to bluff in this spot all that often. When he bets the turn, it's kind of a gross spot. He does have top set occasionally, but not super well. He has it actually a decent amount of the time. I think that a lot of his other hands are like betting bigger just to commit themselves. So if he has some kind of like king XXX, I expect him to bet bigger. Uh, Unless he's worried about the 4-5, which is, pretty unlikely. I don't think he has a 4-5, but I think a lot of his hands just bet bigger just because they want me to fold, and they think I'm going to fold to a big bet. His small bet to me looks like he's asking for action. So I do decide to fold. And here on the right, this is what I'm talking about, is raising to isolate the fish. I think this is somewhat standard as long as you have people that aren't punishing you too badly for it. And I remember this hand. I misplayed this hand. Well, yeah, in my opinion, I misplayed this hand. Here with kings single suited, I just call. Um, it's not a super strong hand to be 3-betting. And I do have to worry about the under the gun limper having aces and coming back over the top. So I get cold called by the big blind, which to me means a pretty strong range, but very pocket pair heavy. So given that, I don't think there's a lot of value in betting the flop. I do get him off of hands like 7-8 suited, but I think most of his hands are pocket pairs. Um, so I decided to check. Um, then on the top left, I make kind of a loose call, given that he's short stacked, but it's not that bad. It's a good hand, but he's a little too short stacked, I think, for me to make that call on the button. And on the top right, I bet kind of on the smaller side to get value from worse draws, since I have the nut draw and kings are likely good. On the bottom right, I decide to check raise. And, alright, what I don't like about this play is that I'm polarizing my range quite a bit. I'm not going to be check raising with a hand like pocket jacks. So I basically have sets, straights. Um, that's it, really. Sets and straights. And then all my draws. What I do like about it is it's very likely that he has a hand like sevens and is going to fold to the second or third barrel. Even though my line doesn't look like much, I just think that it's very tough for somebody to put in a lot of money with a hand that weak, and I think his hand's very likely weak. I also think that if he does have a set on the flop, he's going to usually 3-bet me, so I save myself some barrels when he does have a strong hand. And I don't think he can have a straight on this board. So I don't like that I polarize my range this much, but some of the times you have to be check raising a flop like this. I just think it's important to be able to do anything. 5 is, I mean, not a great turn card, but I don't think he has a 5 almost ever. Maybe 5-6 suited. But I think I'm going to stick to my planning and bet the turn here. And probably bet most rivers. It does suck that I'm repping very few combos of hands. But I just think if he's sitting here with pocket eights, what's he going to do about it? I do have my overs to a lot of his pocket pairs. Or not a lot, but a couple. And, yeah, I mean, I don't like it. And I guess the fact that I don't like it is kind of a spoiler that he's going to pick me off here. But I really just think that it's slightly bad just in that I have very few hands that take this line for value, but at the same time, it's just like every once in a while you have to do something and you have to um, put them to the test. Otherwise, if you're never check raise bluffing the flop in a spot like this, they should be betting every single flop, which puts you in a tough spot when you check. I just think it's important to be able to, and I've said this before and I'm kind of repeating myself now, but it's important to be able to have air in a lot of spots and to have thin value in a lot of spots and things like that. So this is a spot where I'm, I guess, capable of having air, but against a good player, I don't like this play just because of how polarized my range is. I don't know that he's a good player yet. So here in the top right, I 3-bet with a very strong double suited hand, and I check a flop that really hits a lot of his calling range pre-flop. And I think it actually is a little bit deceptive for me to check this with air, and I think I can pick it up on future streets. I don't think he's going to stab at the flop too often. And so I decided to bet turn. I think if he doesn't have like tens or better with or some kind of decent draw, he's going to fold. And so here on the bottom right, I get picked off. He had queens. Um, I don't like my play, as I said, but I don't hate it. And I'm actually going to wrap up this part of the video, and we'll pick up with this session next time. Let me know any questions you guys had, and I really encourage you guys that are just playing No Limit to start looking into other games. I'm starting to learn PLO is the best poker decision I ever made, and now I'm starting to learn some other games just because as games keep getting solved, people keep getting better. The edge there is less, and we're finding less and less games online, and so to be able to choose across multiple different types of games is really beneficial to a pro. And the games that are less solved, there's going to be more edge to the people who are working hard to figure it out. So, sorry for forcing some PLO on some of you, but it's for your own good, and it's only because I love you. Uh, I guess, yeah, let me know if you have any comments or questions, and I'll see you guys next week. Take care. This is Phil Galfond for BlueFirePoker.com.